And welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We are live on YouTube for Rock M Plus subscribers at season 8. And we are here to talk about your Missouri basketball Tigers as the only podcast strictly talking about Mizzou basketball. I am your host, Sam Snelling. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me on your left. Just take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe, all that kind of stuff to help us grow the channel a little bit. With me, as usual, back after a 2-week hiatus, actually. Matthew J. Harris. Matt, how are you?
Sleep deprived, and we're not even 24 hours in, but I'm fine otherwise. We didn't have much time to mourn last Thursday because roster retooling waits on no grieving process. So I'm fine.
Basically it boils down to, like, if you make the NCAA tournament, you have like that weekend, and then you have the portal.
Yeah.
So, well, why don't we do this? Since we already have a question about the portal, why don't we start with the portal, and then we'll kind of circle back and kind of actually talk about the action,
the actual basketball that was played.
Yeah, the actual basketball. What happened? I think Watkins and his soon to be published latest episode of The Verdict kind of covered what went wrong with Tigers down the stretch. So we won't maybe get as grandiose as he did, but we could certainly kind of hit on some points.
Yeah.
Portal wise, for those of you who are watching us live, or part of the Rock M Plus side of things, I did sort of put out a primer. I believe that was on Saturday, and it was basically just like a quick walkthrough of kind of where the roster is, what the turnover is looking like, potential portal entries. At this point, Missouri is not anticipating anybody going into the portal, but some of those conversations are still have yet to take place or are currently taking place. And so, kids will kind of get their feel for where they're at. And then, you might get a decision or two, but Missouri is certainly not pushing anybody out the door, I think is probably the right way to say it. Right.
Yeah. You never know what's going to happen in exit meetings, and you also don't know what's going to happen as you bring guys in. I don't think Jordan Butler was a guy last year that was looking to depart, and then it became very clear that Missouri was looking to bring in another big, and there was a chance for him to go home, and so we had a de facto trade. So you don't know realistically until you get in the room or until guys see kind of what the roster resculpting process is going to give. But I think right now there's not like a guy that I would have on transfer watch, going into exit meetings. We'll see sort of what happens as sort of the natural ebb and flow of portal season happens. But I think you come out of the year feeling like, all right, there's 10 to 11 guys on the roster that feel good about where they are. And, I think they've done a good job, at least the staff has, of at least, I think, framing expectations coming into the year where some guys were going to be. And if you look at, I'm going through the lineup data right now, a lot of it's really close to what Matt Watkins projected in the season and what we projected at the beginning of the year. Most guys are within 2 to 3 spots of where they were. And so I think you could sort of look back and say, okay, everyone played about what they were expected to play. Everyone got the roles they were expected to have. Ant maybe overperformed, maybe Aiden Shaw slipped a little bit, but in a lot of ways, there wasn't really a lot of fluctuation, away from what we forecasted, all the way back in September. And so you presume that the staff is set expectations and, along those lines as well, you feel like there's a good basis for conversations to happen coming out of the year. But again, we'll see what exit interviews yield and sort of where guys are. But I think it's a fair assessment to say that I would not expect a lot of churn at this point, but we'll see.
Yeah. In the piece, I basically sort of touched on Shaw as a guy who could potentially look for other opportunities, just simply seeing, guys coming in, who are already sort of ahead of him on the depth chart. And, he did sort of have a couple nice moments against Mississippi State. I thought he played well against, State in the SEC tournament. Sort of pressed into action there. maybe he sort of sees a path to minutes. I don't know. But certainly, like we always like to say, we root for kids.
Yeah.
If Aiden, and not just Aiden, but if any of the players like think they're going to have a better shot at the kind of minutes they want to experience in college somewhere else, then like I always say, good luck.
Yeah.
But I think the other one that I sort of brought that we touched on a little bit in private conversations was the possibility of Trent. Trent's struggled a little bit with some of the mental side of things. Clearly he's a talented guy. Missouri really likes him. Again, this is nothing that they're not going to push him out the door, but I did sort of, broach the idea that, it's possible that maybe he sees a better path for him, sort of like fix his head a little bit someplace else. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but when you're sort of like, all right, like it's unusual for for us to look at the roster, especially in today's day and age, and be like, look, all these guys are coming back. Because reality is like very seldom does that happen. But I would be surprised if Trent had entered. Less surprised if Aiden did.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're doing then is you're looking at you're bringing back your starting point guard in Anthony Robinson. You're bringing back your starting 4 or 5 man, whatever you want to say, and Mark Mitchell. You are bringing back a guy who started about half the season in Trent Pierce. You are losing a big burly center in Josh Gray. You are losing quite a bit of scoring pop.
Yeah.
Like off the ball on the wing. And you're talking about like Caleb Grill, Tamar Bates, both those guys. So when it comes to like what Missouri is looking for in the portal, I think Missouri is looking for a scoring guard and certainly somebody who could fill in minutes at least at the 5, and then if there's some room left over, maybe a guy who can kind of be a shooter on the wing off the bench.
Yeah. I think that at this point, you need at least one bucket getter to come in and sort of be and give you that scoring punch. The 5 spot right now is looking probably like the most robust section of the market as we come into early portal season. There are a
And
lot of
early
options.
too, yeah, or like a lot of
Yeah,
guys are hopping in early.
the big man market's always sort of a distinct thing. We can talk about that in a minute or two, but the 5 right now looks like there are better options and more diverse options there that, Missouri could go any number of ways the 5 if it wanted to in terms of like options it can evaluate. Scoring wise, there have been names that have floated around a little bit, but we haven't seen, big names come into the portal yet. It's been a lot of guys who are probably bucket getters on really bad low majors have gone in the past couple weeks, and those guys are ones that like ignore their gaudy stat lines. To get any sort of efficiency, you're going to have to chop their minutes and their usage practically in half. So if you're like seeing a guy on a number 300 team who's averaging 18 a game, like just assume that guy's probably just a role player at best at a high major program. We've seen some mid-major guys like Lamar Wilkerson just went in tonight. He averaged 20 a game at Sam Houston State. We sort of like him. I've got to go back and do a look at him. So you're starting to see a few of those types of guys move in. But otherwise, it's a lot of probably like, what would you say, like guys who are 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th in the rotation at a high major have started to filter in to the portal right now. You're seeing a lot of bench guys coming in. Missouri is not looking at those options here. I think that's the thing you got to consider. They need a guy with a proven track record of scoring. And, I think Watkins and I will probably say it this way. You need to be able to account for chopping their usage down. So we're talking about guys who are probably in, the top 20 conferences in the country at a minimum. You're talking about guys that have 28% usage, playing 70% of minutes, and are averaging close to 18, 19 games of floor. You've really got to find legitimate efficient scorers, and the closest one that maybe is qualified is Kwamari Peterson out of East Tennessee State. We posted about him today, a quick kind of data scout on him. We haven't gone really much deeper than that at this point just because we don't know how serious that pursuit is. We know Missouri has some interest there. We know there are some connections to Kwamari Peterson, and just sort of his camp there. But that's sort of the guy you're looking at, and Kwamari's like in 14th in transfer portal composite rankings right now. It's just not a really strong combo guard market at this point. It's day one, but that's what I'd say to people as we sort of like set the table here is Missouri needs a combo guard and a big. The big man market's looking really, really nice early. We're going to need some patience with combo guards. And then it's realistically after that, it's probably, the best, third guy you can get. I think you'd want to have a spacer or a shooter that can sort of replicate what Caleb Grill offered. You don't need a 1-to-1, but that type of player who can be a little bit more of an off the ball type of threat would probably be their third thing. But it's not, that's if you can find it. The first two are a bucket getter and a big. So we'll see. That's sort of the best place to start.
The big man market, as you mentioned, has been pretty robust to start. There's a lot of interesting type of guys that are already out there. You have somebody who's like younger with a higher upside, a guy like Magoon Guath. For anybody who doesn't know who Magoon Guath is, he was starting center for San Diego State as a freshman. Had a really nice year. Got hurt later in the year and missed some time, but came back for the NCAA tournament. He's a guy who can stretch the floor a little bit. He was, believe, on the all defensive team in the Mountain West.
Fourth
as
best
a
block
freshman.
percentage in the country. 14%
Yeah, blocks a lot of
percentage.
shots. And for a team like Missouri that doesn't block a lot of shots, at least for me, like that's like, ooh, like I like guys who block shots.
Yeah.
But this is all saying like you don't necessarily know what the price tag on a lot of these guys are going to be. There's a little bit more of like an experience transfer in Davidson, the Nevada transfer.
Yeah.
Nick Davidson, right?
Yep, Nick Davidson.
And you've looked into him a little bit more, so I'll let you kind of talk about him.
Junior, Southern California native, has kind of, I think, epitomized what you see in a lot of Mountain West Conference transfers. Steady improvement over a couple of years, came in, averaged about 18 minutes a game as a freshman against decent competition. He was up to 35 minutes this year. Went from 6.7 points to 11.6 to 15.6 points per game against top 100 teams. Did it on an efficient shooting clip, I think 57 from 2, 37 from deep. Rebounds at a pretty good clip. Interestingly, he's got a good assist rate for a big man. That's around 13%, which that's about half of what a point guard is. But for a big, that's pretty good. Grades out pretty well defensively. Listed at 6'10", probably closer to 6'8" or 6'9", but still grades out really well. There has a 5% block percentage at that height, so that tells you that he's got good positional defense, good wall up. If you watch him defensively, he's not like Guath or anybody else who can explode off the floor, but he's got good timing and good verticality to block shots. He kind of falls in a bucket that I think Watkins and I probably would call skilled technicians.
Yeah.
With Braden Huff falls in there with probably another guy named Christoph Tilley out of Santa Clara. These are guys that aren't going to like kill you with the physical skills testing in combine testing, but they're hyper skilled. They have a primary post move, a secondary, and they can probably work to a third counter if they need to. All of them are really good at rolling. They can play. You can invert the floor and roll them into the paint. They can catch on the move. They're good, savvy cutters off the ball. And a guy like Davidson can stretch it a little bit, can step out and shoot from three. So if you're looking at Missouri, the allure of guys like that is you couldn't throw the ball into Josh Gray this year. You just couldn't post him, couldn't even really hit him on rolls. So the threat of scoring within 3 feet of the bucket was pretty much removed with him there. And so he did a good job rebounding and he did a good job defending, but you could still get stuck playing 4-on-5. Guys like Huff, Braden Huff, who's at Gonzaga and is rumored to be going in, a guy like Davidson from Nevada and Tilley from Santa Clara sort of help solve that problem for you. And they have some skill that they can play with, and they are They play in spots and actions that kind of like Missouri would use, that would be familiar to you if you watched Missouri and watched them. So that's sort of the market that, I think we are looking at, is saying, okay, is that where they want to go? Magoon Guath, as you mentioned, is kind of an upside play. Like if you're a spreadsheet sicko and you're a draft scout kind of like wonk, Magoon Guath's name was popping like as early as December. Has shown touch around the rim, still raw there, still really, really, really skinny, but showcases a lot of traits that would make him unique. The question is, you have a guy kind of like that in Trent Pierce, who you didn't see it all. Not Trent Pierce, but Trent Burns, who you didn't see it all this year. There's a kid out of Loyola Chicago, Miles Rubin, is kind of in the same vein as a high upside, kind of mobile big that can catch on the move, blocks a lot of shots. And then there's the segment of the market, which I think we would call the better Josh Grays. And those are guys that are formerly highly rated recruits that haven't quite lived up to their billing. That they're productive players, but they haven't quite popped as like all conference or starters. And that's Ernest Uday out of TCU. There's Jalen Washington, who I've put a pin in, out of North Carolina, who sort of falls in that bucket. If you wanted to, you could even go down to the mid-major level and say there's like a Giovanni Imadru, who is out of George Mason. So those are sort of the buckets you're looking at. Skilled technicians, high upside guys who are probably younger. And then you've got dudes that are straight depth plays that can finish at the rim, block some shots, and give you 40 to 50% of minutes. If it sounds like there's a lot going on there, there is, because the big man market, as we've said repeatedly, has done a nice job filling in and giving you some diverse options if you want to go that way.
Well, yeah, and not all of those guys are currently in the portal, but have been sort of rumored to be entering, which is a whole other side of this. Is there's like the official portal entry where you're seeing guys pop up on Twitter and whatnot, and then there's the the truly Discord, source, all kinds of stuff. Just like, well, I heard this guy might be going in, and and then you basically wait until they do or not, and then if they actually do, then you can sort of make those moves. But I mean, there's so much that's going on these days that is like contact directly with agents. That's another thing is a lot of guys are entering now with this do not contact tag. Essentially that's them saying don't
call my agent.
Don't call me, call my agent. And you can start there. And I think it's not necessarily like the worst way to approach it, just to sort of, weed out maybe some unnecessary discussions. Because a coach, can reach out to an agent, find about what, the player is looking for in NIL money, and then determine if they're interested in kind of getting in. So like if we've mentioned anybody who you haven't seen pop up on transfer portal list, chances are they may not be in the portal yet. They just sort of been, rumored to be. Looking ahead, it is just day one. The portal is open for a month. It's, as more teams fall out of the tournament, you'll see some more names kind of get in. I think it is very possible that a lot of the kind of negotiation level stuff happens on a little bit longer of a timeline, as because right now, like from the numbers that you've been hearing and all that kind of stuff, it is surprising how high some of these guys value their services, and certainly like I've always been a pro pay the players guy, so I'm not gonna try and talk down someone's value, but it is grown significantly in just a few years, and I think that's going to take some time to kind of get used to.
Yeah, I think Watkins has, made a good point on the forums the other day here. A lot of this that's happening is we thought we might see some deflation in prices just because we're losing the 5th-year market. A lot of the COVID years were gone. And so we thought, it was kind of unclear, if you took those 50 years out, would you see prices go up because you'd see things shrink a little bit? it appears that may be driving some of it now. And the other thing that's happened here is you have the House settlement, which is looming out there. A lot of schools have signed on to it, but a federal judge still has to like essentially bless and sanction it. And there's going to be a hearing on April 7 where people who have qualms with how that looks can file statements, can make statements, can file briefs. The judge will likely, if you believe, subject matter experts on this and legal experts, is probably going to take her time and go through those and really weigh them out before issuing an opinion that either affirms that ratification or says, no, you guys have to go back and do it again. Why all that technical legalese matters is, as part of the House settlement, NIL deals are going to be going through a scrutiny process. They're going to be essentially scrubbed, and you can't just theoretically they can't just be treated as pay for play, even though I think that's silly. We should just let people have contracts and pay them what they think their value is worth. That's
Right.
not what we're going to do here. We're going to presumably have a housekeeping service or like a vetting of these deals. And if the NCAA presumably could say, this doesn't pass the smell test, no, your $2.5 million deal is not valid.
Yeah.
So rather than risk that happening and these things getting hung up in limbo, there's supposedly going to be a push by agents and reps to get deals done in basically the first 2.5 weeks of the portal here. If you are a school, you face the push and pull of, I don't want to be the first one to set the market price at an absurdly high rate or be the sucker who has to pay over market value for a guy. But there's also the question here of, do you want to risk having your deal caught up in whatever sort of oversight process is going to happen?
Yeah.
So we're in a weird spot where there's constricted demand. There's the House settlement sort of coming in here. There are high asks coming in. I think, one thing we've consistently heard is that like a starter at the high major level, or may draw 500,000. All conference guys near $1 million, and you can imagine what happens after that. So it's harder now, at least out of the gate, to probably avoid 7-figure asks. It's just a question of, how long can everybody sit and wait and sort of play chicken to see who's going to move off a number first.
Right.
So
Well,
we'll see.
especially when you're talking about like certain schools trying to get back on the right side of,
Right.
and strictly kind of thinking, schools that are replacing coaches, like
There's one in
specifically
Bloomington.
Indiana, Indiana and Texas, I'm sure are going to be more than willing to spend money that, maybe they are less sure about, but they're willing to spend it to make sure that they're competitive.
Yeah.
Especially like after Indiana missed the NCAA tournament, Texas, the only reason Texas got in was because they're in the SEC. If that same performance is in the Big 12, they're probably left out. So yeah, it's interesting, as we're kind of ramping up. A lot of coaches are finding jobs. What's going to happen kind of on the upper levels, and our guys going to be able to sort of get the money they're seeking, and schools that have been sort of playing the game all along, like we'll say like Missouri, who's probably closer to the middle of the pack in their league than there may be some others that are going to be fighting for a different group of players than maybe they were last year or the year before.
Yeah. The benefit that Missouri has is that they have less needs on the shopping list this year. I mean, in the sense of Missouri is not having to go find 5 or 6 dudes, and they are not having to vet 2-3 depth pieces out and really work through that market. And there's a lot of clutter in there too. From last year, Watkins and I spent a lot of time trying to go back over projections for how you scale mid-major plus guys up. Missouri's not in that position right now. Presumably they're going to be able to let development help their freshman class this year grow into supporting pieces and depth guys next year. And hopefully a few of them take bigger steps than that. So that gives Missouri a little bit of a reprieve that they're not having to go round out a rotation. They're having to go find very specific things in the market. They know what they need. They kind of have a good sense for probably what they need. The sticking point here is going to be cost, because if you want to go get a proven bucket getter, the last 3 or 4 years tells us no matter what inflation says, every year those guys have been near the top of the market in terms of what they're asking for. You want a proven big, there's probably no more expensive commodity in the portal than a proven big.
Yeah.
So that's the thing here. Like, it's your needs are less, but your budget has to stretch a bit more. You may have to face some stress there. So it'll be interesting to see sort of what the push and pull there is for Missouri. You know, do they eventually decide, like, okay, we could keep waiting and waiting and waiting, but we have, you know, a guy that fits 80-90% of what we need, and the price point is where we need it. Do we wait for a little bit better, or do we just get it done now? I don't think they're in that position now, because again, it's day one, and 10 minutes before I got on this spot, I was looking at in the transfer portal is at this stage where Josh Dix, a very solid wing from Iowa, I'm not going to disparage Josh Dix, he's a solid starter, is a top 5 player in the portal at this point. That's where we are here. Like, the major assets haven't moved yet. So I think that's, you know, the fireworks haven't started, but I think what's interesting is you're already sort of seeing the questions about dollars floating around, but we'll see how much that persists and how much if we've learned anything, coaches will give in and they will go pay money, and they're going to try and solve this problem because they're going to be terrified that they're going to miss somebody. So we'll see how it relates to Missouri, but the fireworks haven't started. We know what their needs are. We've got a loose sense of what's happening in one segment of the market, and we're waiting for another one to do something, anything. If you are an elite combo guard, please get into the portal now. I'm really tired of watching big men roll to the rim. Really, really tired of it. I've watched 13 of them do it already.
Yeah.
And
Watkins just sent us that Deshaun Jackson is entering the transfer portal, the starting center for Iowa State.
I liked him out of Charlotte a couple years ago, and when he left Washington State, that would not be a bad little guy to put a pin in. And not a little guy; he's a hoss. But
yeah, he's a big dude.
Like, the big man market, if
he's the kind of guy
who it's there for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say with Jackson, when you see him on the floor, you don't think he's like 6'11". Like, he looks like he's probably like 6'8" because he's like so big.
He's proportional.
Yeah, like he's just a big dude. But yeah, he's tall too. Well, so there's a lot that still has to happen in the portal. Like, we're basically like, we're day one. Missouri is feeling things out. We know what they're looking for, and we know what to keep our eyes open for. At this point, it hasn't fully fleshed out. As we find out more, we'll talk about it. And it is being talked about pretty consistently on the forums. So let's talk about actual basketball games that were played. Because you were, let's see, last time we recorded, it was pre-Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
Because I recorded with Blake after the Kentucky game before
the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, before the NCAA, everything went, or for SEC tournament, and then with Rocco Miller before the NCAA tournament. Some of that was circumstance. Basically, I've been wanting to kind of do that with Blake for a while. Like, we had exchanged a few text messages and thought it might be nice to give you a night off. But
I appreciate that.
But yeah, like a really, really sour ending on what was otherwise a really terrific season, where Missouri was one of the more entertaining teams for the better part of 2 months. Out of the first 3, November was boring because of all the teams that they were playing. That's just not the kind of not the kind of schedule that I hope Dennis lines up again next year. I mean, he probably will, but November, if you don't remember, opened with Memphis on the road, and then proceeded to have like all home games against quad 4 opponents.
Yep.
Some of them went well, some of them went less well, but Missouri didn't lose. But then they hit December, and they really kind of like, they found themselves, I think, a little bit in the Kansas game.
Yeah.
They looked terrific. January looked, terrific in February. Beat Alabama, were the toast of the town, and that was sort of like the culminating moment of the season. And maybe that's what caused this team to just sort of go into a hole after that. Because like they had, it did sort of feel like the pinnacle of the season, where it was just like, this is what they were playing for. They got the the kudos from everybody. They were on, being talked about on national broadcasts and podcasts and all that kind of stuff. And people were talking about them as a dark horse for a Final Four. And then they proceeded to lose every other game they played, other than beating South Carolina at home. Which, granted, I mean, they played pretty well that game. Defense was questionable. But and then Mississippi State on a neutral, and Mississippi State is, certainly struggled. That was a sort of a cat and mouse game, back and forth. And Missouri just sort of made a couple plays near the end and were able to kind of pull away. But yeah, what's your take? How did you feel about the way things wrapped up?
I think I took Friday off from watching basketball just because between prepping for Drake and prepping for Portal, I'd hit a saturation point. But it was good just to sit back, and I went back and I looked at sort of just every game I track, what the forecasted margin is, how much Mizzou under or overperforms it, and then just was the game a flip result or not. And you look at Missouri overperformed its margin probably by about 100, forecasted margin by about 110 points. It moved up from 50th in the preseason to 20th in KenPom. And it flipped 5 games that it was expected to lose. And it was forecasted 13th in the SEC, and it finished 7th. It was not anywhere close to the bubble when we were seeing preseason, bracketology happening. It earned a number 7 seed, or it earned a number 6 seed. In totality, it was a successful season. And I don't think you can dispute that. And I think how the ebb and flow of it, inevitably is going to change how people perceive it. But I think writ large, it was a successful year for them. And I say that in the sense of everybody had sort of left this program for dead last year. And, they rebuilt it, and they did it in arguably the deepest league in the last 15 years. If this had been any other year, Missouri probably would have finished in the top 4 with the way its efficiency metrics worked. In the SEC, it would have finished in the top 4. So I think when I look at sort of the macro view, it's an undoubtedly successful season. People should feel happy with what happened. They reestablished a healthy level of performance. And if you look at the 2 years where Dennis Gates has had the full complement of players that he needs and has not lost 110 to 115 games due to injury, his teams have played pretty well. We're going to continue to do what we said, kind of the inverse with Zoe, which is like modernize the offense here. They've got to figure out how to guard consistently. They've got to rebound consistently. That's something that I think is going to be another sort of song, hymn sheet we sing off in the offseason. It's what cost them down the stretch. But I think from a macro perspective, it was a good season. I agree with you. I think that when they got the win over Alabama, that felt like a crescendo. And it felt like at that moment for them to be acknowledged, as a quality team, it felt like they had, I think somebody around the program had sort of said, like they'd been, digging out, from underneath boulders, digging out from underneath dirt, and they finally saw the sun again. And for them, there was relief, and they felt like they could breathe. And unfortunately, there was another 4 weeks left in the season, and I don't think they handled prosperity in the way that you would want to see them handle it. And I don't think anybody can dispute that. The numbers say they played poorly down the stretch. They regressed heavily on defense, heavily on the glass. I think you can trace the offensive issues to Caleb Grill cooling down. Ant and Trent, I think, hit a wall down the stretch when they were playing well. They had a full complement of guys in those three that could go up and down the lineup. And I think when they got to Wichita, there was, I think, maybe some self-satisfaction and, among some vets that they had reestablished sort of the program as in a healthy position, but I don't know where they were mentally to go into a game where all week people are talking about you as the team that's probably going to be upset. You're going to be the team that's on upset watch. Drake is going to come in here and, make this a meat grinder and, claim a win. I think when you watch the game, Missouri did not look like a team that came out the same way that Texas Tech did and took a fight to them. Did not look like the same way that like Alabama looked against a low possession team in St. Mary's and came out and took the fight to them. Nate Oates said in the St. Mary's Alabama game, during a TV timeout, I don't care about pace. We're missing rim attempts and we're not being aggressive enough going to the rim. I don't care about pace. He literally said, this is Nate Oates saying, I don't care if there's 60 possessions or 80. We got to get to the rim. And it felt like that level of assertiveness, that aggressiveness, the things that would have helped them win and probably were the things that were going to be the hardest yards they had gotten all season, they didn't get in Drake. So it's a disappointing end. And hopefully what it does is there are guys now that have seen what a tournament run looks like. There are young guys on that bench who've seen what happens when you let up, when you ease up, when there's not focus all the way to the tape. Maybe that's a culture builder for you. But in the moment, I get why people are upset and frustrated because this team showed immense potential. But I think people forgot in November. They looked a little inconsistent. They looked a little shaky. When they came out of the, people forget the LIUs or the Alabama States or the Jack States. There's some shakiness. There's some inconsistency and lack of focus in those games. And so you can't.
Well, and really, like we pointed out, I don't remember if it was in late December, early January, we pointed out how like their rebounding, which was really good in November, had completely regressed through the month of December. And so like that's one of the things where like I've had people sort of talk to me privately, not sources or anything, just friends, like people that you know that you're a Missouri fan and want to talk about Mizzou and all that kind of stuff. And they say like, what's up with the rebounding? And up until like, the last stretch of the season, I was like, well, like they were really good in November. They hit the slide in December where the rebounding wasn't great. And then they recovered and then they were good at rebounding again. So I thought again, up until the end of the season when, they sort of had that, regression, I guess, that the rebounding complaint was a little bit, overblown because whatever they had going on in December, they fixed it. And now we're talking about it again. It's the same thing with the defense. It's just like, they had moments where, and again, like, one of the things that I've always liked about Bart Torvik's side is you can sort of section out segments of the season and looking at like, well, here's how they were playing when things were going well. Here's how they were playing when things weren't going well. And the offense was remarkably consistent, even at the end of the season where, Caleb Grill had clearly sort of had cooled a bit. The defense had just plummeted. And some of that was rebounding, but it's really hard to, and then like, this is one of the things that, has been a little bit of a complaint, at least for me, like, this season. And I feel as though this team thought that they could maybe turn it on and turn it off.
Yeah.
And there were moments like, okay, we can come back in these guys. We know we've beaten them already, whatever, like we can turn it on. And it's just like, that's hard to do. And especially like in this league this year, it's really hard. And if you're not on all the time and you do take a couple losses, now it's even harder to turn that switch back on and become the team that we saw come out of the blocks against Alabama. That saw the team that looked as good as they did at Florida. And
At
I think like,
Tennessee.
what's that?
And at Tennessee as well. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you don't get an outlying shooting performance from Tennessee from three, like Missouri probably wins that game. And so, like it is one of those things where I agree with you. You step back and you look at the season as a whole, and you're like, I don't like if you'd have told me this in November that this is going to be the end result, I'd have been thrilled. I am like one of the the guys who will always talk about March being a random results generator, particularly the NCAA tournament. NCAA tournament spits out random results. Sometimes you lose, sometimes it sucks. The goal is to get there as often as you possibly can and hope that those results turn in your favor a few times. But
I would say
it
this
did
too.
not end well. Yeah, it did not end well. And I do think that there is valid criticism for how things ended for for the staff. There are people that are going off the deep end, and I've seen comments online that are quite frankly stupid. But there are valid criticisms for how the season ended. You did have this sort of lightning in a bottle, and it got out, right?
Yeah.
And so like I certainly think like, and I'm sure the coaching staff is already doing this, is like, like sort of looking at what happened. How do we address what happened, dissect it and make sure that like that level of drop off in play doesn't happen again.
Yeah. I think the other thing to consider too is, I think when I published it last spring, like the baseline for a team that was in Missouri's position with the recruiting class I had bringing in was 23 wins, a seed somewhere between 4 and 6, and winning a game in the NCAA tournament. Like, even if you were to go back and look historically at like the teams that with Missouri's recruiting class and sort of the mix of talent they had, Missouri's hit a historical baseline here. So I think that's the thing you have to consider here is there's the immediate results, which suck. There's the very visceral sense that the last month of basketball was a very, 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 very harsh drop off. And that was frustrating. And then you have to look back at the macro here of this team has sort of done what teams of its ilk have done for the last 10 to 12 to 15 years. So it's not as if Missouri written as a whole, its body of work this year was awful. Just the way, it played out created consternation. But I think there's reasons to come out of this year and think, okay, there's some lessons drawn from this. We created an environment where we have a lot of young talent that just experienced something that can be a good teaching moment for them. To go through a month of, you can't just play the front of the jersey. You can't look at it and say that's a win for us. You can't just flip it on and off. You can't just come into a game and think, okay, we got off to a slow start. Now we're going to start attacking. Now we're going to ramp the pace up. There are now, there were 700 underclassmen this year. They're going to go into next year realizing what it takes to maintain success and consistency. They created an environment where those guys got a good first year of college basketball to see what it's like in a historically tough league, going through just a grind for 2 months and what it takes to actually see that through to the postseason. So there's some lessons I think that can help this team long term, but in the near term, I'm not going to tell anybody that their disappointment's misplaced and that they should not feel frustrated, because it's frustrating to feel like you've got a team that, you look at what probably 5 teams they beat are going to play in the Sweet 16 this coming week.
Mm-hmm.
That's frustrating. Arkansas is going to play in the Sweet 16. Ole Miss is going to play in the Sweet 16. And you felt better than those teams, and you showed that in 2 out of 3 meetings against them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, like you said, there's a bit of the random results generator there, but Missouri had a month to better position itself for a 4 seed, to avoid playing a Drake. It had a month to, lock up a double bye so it could avoid playing a Florida on night 2. There were opportunities for this team to position itself to avoid the kind of games that really put you at the mercy of that random result sort of situation that you see and that variance that you see. And, that's something that you've got to remind them of next year of, we had the talent, we had a team that we thought had the right mix, but we didn't play the way we needed to optimize our path. And that's on nobody but us. And if they embrace that and there's that accountability and they want to get better and they want to buy into defending at a high level and rebounding, then you can flip this into what I think Watkins and I think is a really, really, really interesting window of opportunity for this team next year. The league is going to be in a really interesting space for a team like Missouri if they can handle this offseason appropriately.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of time to sort of look at what other teams are losing and sort of what the SEC is going to look like next year. It is an opportunity lost, and it does suck. And look, we are Missouri fans. If you're listening to this podcast or watching us now, chances are you are also a Missouri fan. You know what it's like to be a Mizzou basketball fan, specifically Mizzou basketball, but Mizzou sports in general. Like there have been a lot of good football seasons recently, but they haven't resulted in a Final Four. Like a playoff. 10 wins, great, love it. No playoff. Missouri basketball has never made the Final Four, and and so I know that you know this. Like I have a trio of buddies who are Kentucky basketball fans. They live in Kentucky. They grew up in Kentucky. This is what happens and the best way that I could explain being a Missouri basketball fan or a Missouri sports fan is like, just think about what it's like to be a Kentucky football fan, and it's like that for every sport. I think that basketball has consistently over the years, taking away maybe the last decade, where they sort of punted a bit. But now with Dennis Gates, I feel like the feeling is back that Missouri basketball has the highest ceiling of most of our competitive sports, and I thought for the first time in a long time, and probably since, because even like the 2012 team, I thought were probably too flawed.
Too flawed
to make like I thought they didn't have depth.
They didn't guard.
They didn't have depth. They struggled to defend, and so like I really had a hard time seeing them make a Final Four. And I think like this is the thing that we're all like wanting, right? Like we all want Missouri to break through that barrier. Yeah, everybody eventually wants a national championship. I just want them to like make a Final Four. The one thing that this program has not done. And I really like this is the first time watching a Missouri basketball team since 2009 where I really thought, like, do I even like think about this team like being that level of team? And for them to basically look like that team, the personalities, the likability. I mean, like you look back at like how charming the 2009 team was, and I think this team had a lot of parallels. And had they not fallen apart and just made the second weekend, like I really think we're probably talking about them in the same breath as the 2009 team.
Yeah.
And now I question that. Like I question, the last month going to like sour enough people where they they won't remember all the amazing things that happened this season, beating Kansas, beating Florida, beating Alabama, really taking what looked like a big step forward for the program. I still think like the Dennis Gates has got this thing pointed in the right direction. It's a tough way to go out. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity lost. I think I won't try and restate what you put out there eloquently. To me, I take a look at it as you had a decade where this program was just sort of adrift, and it has not, I think, put together a consistent sort of sense of identity, how it wants to play, where every year, or even the results on the floor, merit consistent attention. And did I think this team had a potential to be a second week team? Sure. They had shown in some high profile games they could match, the talent and meet the moment to get a result. To me, stringing together tournaments, regardless of the outcome, is the operative goal right now. To just consistently show every year that you'll be one of the top 35 programs in the country. That when people think about, September, October, we get to preseason time. It's like, all right, we got to put together those teams that are going to be tournament. You go, oh yeah, Missouri out of the SEC. We think about them. Yeah. Because then that changes the type of kid that you can recruit. It changes the type of perception you have when you go into portal season. You're not just a team where it's like, all right, maybe they'll get it done this year. Maybe they'll have the right mix and they'll find the right kid in the portal. You have the consistency of results. You have the consistency of program and identity and the way you want to play, to where you can begin to think about those aspirations as something rooted not maybe in like, oh man, it's a lightning in the bottle moment. It's no, there's a process here. There's a system in place. And maybe we aren't perennially, in Final Four contention, but there's a way that the baseline for this program is we earn NCAA tournament bids. Every 3 or 4 years, we build a team that can make a serious threat.
Yeah.
This is what that starts to look like to me. And so I'm frustrated with how the Drake game played out. But I think if you can start to reestablish, or if you're starting to reestablish the respectability of Missouri being a team that's consistently mentioned in the postseason, consistently mentioned as a team that you have to worry about in the SEC, you're starting to really turn the ship and starting to put together some stable results. So that's how I choose to look at coming out of the year. The end sucked, but they didn't let one bad year, keep them in the ditch. They got up, they reestablished a very, very, very healthy baseline of where you want to be. They're going to go into next season potentially returning some of the most production in the SEC. They're going to bring back 2 all-conference level players, and they know exactly what they need in the transfer portal to fill out and fit out this roster. The end of the season sucked, but the things that can remedy it and can continue to keep the program well-positioned are easy to state. We spent the first half of the pod talking about the needs they have. That's well known, and it can be crystallized. So I think that's the thing I look at is it's not big philosophical things that we're talking about, like what's happening with investment in the program. Is the athletic department really no, it's very, very tangible things. 50% production, 2 cornerstones for your rotation. You need 3 dudes who can come in and round it out. And the SEC is going to be hitting a hard reset, and you can make a move. Yeah. That's very clear, and you can go with it. So that's what I tend to look at is the end sucked, but they have positioned themselves well for future development and to really get to the point where you're envisioning them, which is a consistent contending status. So that's how I choose to look at this. I choose optimism, which is a rare thing for me. Normally I'm the sour puss on this pod.
So, well, I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. Like I said, we are doing our best to kind of keep these shorter. I think you and I could probably go because it has been a few weeks since we've potted, and I think those always make us go a little longer. But but it's portal season, so there's always stuff to kind of come back and talk about. What Missouri is going to do, all that kind of stuff. We're really excited for the spring. Rock'em Plus is growing by the day. I'm really excited. We've had a bunch of new signups. Like, people are excited for the portal season. And so, if you're listening to this and you're not a member of Rock'em Plus, get on the forums and come talk to us. It's been a lot of fun. If you are already a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. We'll be back probably next week. Look, if it's entirely possible that there just nothing happens this week, and we may just be like, yeah, let's just take it off. But if there's stuff to talk about, we'll come back next week and talk more portal, and then try to kind of keep it loose. But in the meantime, you can find us on the Rock'em Plus forums. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
No, just if you're joining us, we're glad to see you. Hopefully you'll enjoy the same kind of sicko content that we try and pump out during portal season. But it's a true time of the year where everybody's welcome, and all your preferences for portal pickups. We don't shame you. Come on in. Tell us what you want from the portal. We don't shame.
Yeah.
That's the forums right now. Anybody can come in and say they want anything, and you know what? We'll hear you out. So
Yeah.
it's fun chat around how you want to retool this roster.
So thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah, we'll see you on the forums. We'll see you on the social medias, and we'll see you on the pod next time. Thanks for tuning in.